Everybody, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you're here. My name is Dr. Leah Howe. I'm an adjunct professor here at Leslie, and the residency courses are some of my very favorite things. And so I'm so delighted for all of you to be diving into your courses this evening. And my co-presenter Lauren and I are really excited to be sharing some research with you this evening around safe and supportive schools. Before we start, I just want to offer you a minute to, if you need a deep breath, if you need a glass of water. I know many of you are coming off of long days of teaching or administrating, and so feel free to do whatever you need to do to settle yourself in, to be most available for today. I've been taking or teaching these courses for about 7 years now, but it's my first year having a kindergartner, and exceedingly grateful for people like you, knowing that there are educators everywhere across the country who care so much about creating safe and supportive environments for kids that they're willing to put aside their own time to be in courses like this. So I am super glad that you're here. And I will also say that darling kindergartner is home with me, and I told her that I am in a meeting and only available for emergencies. And there have been 2 emergencies since joining this Zoom 20 minutes ago. One was snack related, one was stuffed animal in the toilet related. So if you see her, I'll let you know. But we're going to go ahead, share our screen, and talk a little bit more about our research. So the title of the study that we're presenting on, and we're going to tell you more about it and more about who we are, but just so you have some footing for where we are going in the next hour together today, we are going to be looking at understanding the student perspective on a felt sense of safety in school settings. So we are going to start with introductions. So if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already, please drop your name, your role, which is your role either in life or in your school, and what course you're taking. You just put those things in the chat and we can start making connections between our course mates and our maybe class or schoolmates. It's great seeing so many different types of educators joining us today.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Leah.
I think that the diversity of role always is a really positive influence on the coursework. Shout out.
And location too. Very interesting where everyone's coming from geographically.
All right, and while we're at it, maybe we'll introduce ourselves. So Lauren, would you want to tell people who you are and a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Lauren Strange. Yes, that is my last name. The students usually ask if I'm being serious. I was born and raised in Tewksbury, Massachusetts, but I currently live in Haverhill, Massachusetts with my husband, Tom, and our 3 one-eyed cats. Yes, all 3 of our cats only have 1 eye each. It's also very fascinating to my high school sophomores. And I currently work at Lowell High School as a U.S. History 1 teacher. I took this set of courses last year, and Leah was one of my professors, and I just became fascinated by what I learned and was really eager to learn more. So I decided I was going to reach out to Leah and partner up with her for some data collection. And this is the production of what we have so far.
Yay. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I'm super, super excited to be doing this with Lauren because, like she said, she just finished course 4. So she was exactly where you guys are this time, or not even this time last year, more recently than that. So it's just been super fun watching the things that we teach in the courses spark interest and excitement and passion. And so I'm super grateful to Lauren, and just the fact that she wants to do research about safe and supportive schools in her free time is such a gift. My name's Leah. I'm a middle school teacher. I'm based in Cleveland, Ohio. I was a middle school teacher. In 2017, I adopted one of my middle school students and needed more flexibility. So at that time, I left the classroom and started adjuncting here at Leslie and consulting internationally around creating safe and supportive schools in all sorts of different environments and contexts. And over those past, 8, 7, 6 years, I've added 3 more babies to the family, and am now just delighted to be teaching the courses and working with so many of you. So super, super excited to be here and to be sharing this learning together today. So our time today, introductions. The next, we're going to talk about our study, just things like the statement of the problem, our research questions, significance, our methodology. Then we want to hear about you and your experience. So participation is highly encouraged. We really want you to be thinking and responding and sort of taking part in the study as well. And then we'll share our findings and compare and contrast. So all that said, let's dig in to our study. So our study is about understanding the student perspective on a felt sense of safety in school settings. This really was the brainchild of Lauren's. She was really interested in understanding student perspective, particularly the idea that many school-age children report varying degrees of stress. We know the ubiquity of trauma. For those of you who have taken course 1, you've been introduced to the ACE study, to the updated ACEs. You know that at a minimum, 64% of our students have some sort of traumatic exposure prior to the age of 18. So we know that trauma and chronic stress is extremely common. We know that it is clearly an issue in our country. We also know that a felt sense of safety is foundational for student engagement, learning, and well-being, right? We, as educators, know that our students' brains ask 3 questions. Am I safe? Am I loved? What can I learn? Okay, and unless that base question of am I safe is satisfied, they're not able to access the learning portion of the brain. And so we know that that felt sense of safety is critical to us achieving our goals as educators in regard to the rigorous academic instruction we want to provide them. And finally, we know that in the past decade, trauma-informed practices have gained traction. We saw some momentum in regard to creating safe and supportive schools. We're seeing an increase in the literature around the impacts of trauma on learning and how to mitigate those impacts. But unfortunately, less is known or documented in the literature around how students themselves define and experience safety in school settings. So we became really curious about the student perspective in particular, and understanding how they themselves perceive safety and experience it in a felt way. So our study went on to have 2 purposes. The first was simply to explore how students perceive and experience safety in school environments. And then secondarily was to identify key factors of that sense of safety, things like their physical, relational, emotional, pedagogical experiences that contributed to a felt sense of safety from the student perspective.
And in order to access that information from the students, these are the research questions that Leah and I came up with and the genesis of this idea. We were wondering, how do students describe a learning environment that feels safe? What elements, for example, teacher behavior, peer interactions, the physical space, teachers' pedagogy, curriculum, how do those contribute or detract from students' sense of safety at school? And how do students' experiences of school safety vary based on background, identity, and past experience? The significance of our study, it's offering that student-centered lens on school safety, which is filling that gap in the literature that Leah discussed. It also can inform school climate initiatives, classroom practices, and policy development within schools. It provides a foundation for cultivating environments that promote psychological safety as well as well-being, and it creates a replicable tool for surveying students' experience that can be used in many contexts. So, for the methodology, we wanted to do a research design, but with a mixed method approach. Our rationale was combining the qualitative and quantitative data and allows for both depth and breadth in understanding the students' perceptions. And our data collection tool was a survey, but more specifically, a Google form. So, for all of you very familiar with Suite, Google Forms are a great way to get information fast. For our participants, they were school-age students, all right now are in high school, potentially from diverse backgrounds and school types. The demographics, we were aiming for a diverse sample across racial, gender, socioeconomic, and experiential lines. We currently have data from 2 specific schools and districts, one of them being Lowell, Massachusetts, and another one being Marion Regional High School in Marion, South Carolina. Our data collection methods were quantitative. Students had to rate how safe they feel in different school spaces and contexts, and then identify contributing factors. For qualitative, there was a semi-structured interview or focus group to explore students' lived experiences and narrate around safety. We have the quantitative topics of demographic, general sense of safety and well-being, learning environment, and class culture. And our qualitative topics were the physical environment, discipline, antithetical practices. That's a $5 word right there. Antithetical practices, teacher relationships, cultural norms, and the academic or curriculum aspects. For our data analysis, we did a lot of quantitative with descriptive statistics, correlations between environmental factors and the perception of safety, in vivo and thematic coding. And then for the qualitative, we did thematic analysis of just experiencing what the students said and specific words or moods that were in their writing.
Okay, so now we're really curious about your experience. So this is going to be a solid chunk of our time together. So I want you to settle in and put on your participating hat, because I would love for you to get out some paper, your phone, somewhere where you can take notes, and then prepare to join the chat, because we have some questions for you about your experience as a student. So go back in time, maybe it was 5 years ago, maybe it was 50 years ago, that you were sitting in a classroom setting, could be anything K through grad school, and put yourself back into the school environment in which you felt the most comfortable, in which you felt the most safe, in which you felt the most able to dig into learning, to make new connections, to maybe you made the most emotional growth, academic growth, social, interactive growth. Put yourself back in that environment. Okay. You there? All right. On your piece of paper or in your notes app on your phone, describe this learning environment. Describe the learning environment in which you felt the safest. And again, Lauren and I are both middle school and high school teachers, so we're great at wait time. So we're going to give you a minute, and it's going to be quiet, and that's going to be okay. Take a minute, think about the prompt, write it down, and then once you think you have an answer, would you please put it in the chat? All right, now you're in this safe classroom, right? How is the room set up? Look around you in your mind, this classroom in your mind, do this mind mapping exercise. Look around you. How is the lighting? How are the desks? What was the physical layout of the room? Where were you seated? What materials were available to you? Think about specifically the physical setup. Think about it, write it on your paper, and when you're ready, drop it in the chat. Okay, you guys are getting really descriptive, and I'm super grateful. Keep the responses coming. All right, now, again, look around your room. If there's anything that you didn't describe in the physical layout, what else did this environment look like? Was there anything up on the walls that stood out to you? Any posters? Any pictures? Any books? What did the other faces in the room say to you, metaphorically? Did they look like you? And then think about what it felt like. What did this classroom feel like to you? Is there any, and I know this can be hard for us as cerebral graduate students here, but what did your body experience? What was the embodied experience like for you in this environment? Think about if you can put yourself back in that space. Do you have any recollection of your physical feeling, your emotional feeling?
Okay, so now that you're in the room, you've described how it looks and how it feels. Leah kind of touched on this, but who's there? Like, who is the teacher or school based professional who is in the room or leading the room? And how do they make you feel safe? What is it about that person in that space that makes it safe for you? So now that we've covered the place and the people, let's dig in a little bit more to how you felt in that space. What made you feel comfortable asking questions or even making mistakes in front of the entire class? So there's an interesting pattern in your responses that we also found in student responses that we took, and we'll dive into that a little later. But I just think it's interesting to see that correlation. And also feel free to react to other people's responses in the chats as well with like hearts, claps, laughs. But now that we're in that safe environment, you're talking a lot about the physical space, the people, a sense of respect. What does it sound like? What does that sound like in a room if you walk into a classroom that you can tell that it is a safe place for students to be? Great. Okay. So we're talking a lot about calm, positive vibes, positive sounds, but what happens when it sours a little bit? Think back to the classroom where you felt the safest. How were the problems or challenges addressed in that space? Great, thank you. And if you haven't answered just that last question, just keep it rolling. Let the data flow. That's Leah and I's favorite thing. So these are some of our quantitative responses. So these are the gender identities of survey participants. About 46.9% were male, 51.3 were female, and 1.9 opted to not disclose their gender identity. For racial identity of survey participants, we have a 35% Black population, 20.5% Asian or Pacific Islander, 8.6% other, which usually means the students were very specific about their racial identity, 11.9% identified as white, and 24% identified as Hispanic. When we did these more scale-based questions, one of the questions simply was, I feel safe at school. And students responded either with strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. And we found most students fell within the agree or neutral category for their response. When we elevated it to emotional safety, we still found students in that middle area of agree or neutral, but the numbers shifted drastically for neutral being more favored in that sense. And then I feel physically safe at school. This is where those are still the top two pillars, but agree goes back up. But unfortunately, once we added the word physically, the disagree and strongly disagree categories also went up. So common elements of the safe learning environment, according to our data, which some of you also put naturally in your chats, were calm and peaceful. 17.5% of our total students talked about calm but not silent classrooms. And the idea of unease and silence, and that is a feature of a safe learning environment to them. 23% mentioned mutual respect in the classroom from teachers and to students, and student to student, and teacher to teacher. And then classroom setup, interestingly enough, 35% of students noted that they don't remember anything about the classroom's setup or how the desks were, the lighting, anything like that, but they have extremely detailed responses about how they felt in that space. One response that really stood out to us is describe the learning environment in which you felt the safest. And one of the students from Lowell High School said, quote, where the teacher is doing one-on-one hands-on activity, I felt safe because the teacher considered my style of learning and was patient, end quote.
Great. And then some qualitative responses. So one interesting component of this study was that Lauren and I's kind of desire for the qualitative questions would have placed too much of a burden on our participants. So we actually had almost, I think it was 12 or 15 qualitative, which are open-ended response questions. And to ask any high school student, or really anybody, even a professional, to sit down and take a 15 question open-ended felt just like too much of a burden. And so we ended up divvying up our qualitative questions and randomizing. We categorized them into our topics such as physical safety, emotional safety, antithetical behaviors, pedagogical approaches, and then distributed them amongst 4 separate versions of the survey. And then sent those out to students in a more randomized fashion. And it was really great because we got responses to all 15 of those qualitative questions, but each student actually only answered 4. And so it was a way to kind of divvy up the burden and still get some really great data, which just worked out super well because we were really interested in a lot of the student descriptions and wanted that sort of more rich language that you can't get from a multiple choice. And we also didn't want to feed them answers. I think so often when it comes to school safety, we as the educators have our own bias and perspective on what we think would feel safe. And so we were really trying to avoid offering those to students. We wanted to elicit the data organically. And so the qualitative allowed us to do that. And so it's just some of our findings. This one was about describing the learning environment in which you felt the safest. And so the 8 questions that we just went through with you are 8 of the 15 that were distributed amongst the surveys. And so interestingly, there are a lot of commonalities between what I was seeing in the chat and our student responses as well. So the high school students noted things like low lighting, personal space, windows, a tidy and clean room, generally a sense of visual calm and clear expectations. I remember when I was a classroom teacher and a BCBA was supporting me, I can kind of like throw confetti everywhere. It was kind of the middle school teacher I was. And she helped me see that amount of even really fun wall stuff could feel like visual clutter to students who are easily overstimulated. And so seeing that feedback repeated here in the study was really interesting. Was interesting for me as somebody who likes, a bunch of stuff kind of everywhere, that visual calm. And then they also included clear expectations in the looks like section, which tells me that in the classrooms in which they felt the most safe, expectations were posted. They were visual and observable in the room. For sounded like, again, we've talked about this, but quiet but not silent, respectful conversation, everyone participating, and peaceful. And then it felt like calm, inviting, respectful, a place you can make mistakes. And that is one that I saw a couple times in the chat too, is your environments where you felt safe were ones where you felt like you could make mistakes. Another student quote, a safe learning environment sounds like a mix of collaborative engagement, quiet focus, and positive social interaction. Um, and again, I just take so much away from what these students said, because for this one, for our extroverts who, like for me, when I picture a safe learning environment, it's super chatty and we're all kind of turn and talking and we're all participating. And I thought this response in particular highlighted that, for them, they needed not only that positive social interaction, but also quiet focus. And that for me as a classroom teacher is a helpful reminder. And then we didn't bring up school violence at all in our prompting, and yet it came up in almost 15% of student responses, just organically elicited, which really just highlighted the fear that students are carrying around school violence with them every day to school. Even students who are in schools that haven't experienced school shootings or mass violence, just the exposure to it in the media is really putting a burden on students. And just seeing that a lot of them mentioned feeling safer when there is security people, when there are police presence. And I know that the opposite can be true. I've worked with students who feel that having police presence on school grounds is really unsettling and unsafe. So it's just interesting the way that those things came up. And just in general, we took away that the school violence is really taking a toll on our students. When it comes to physical layout, students repeatedly remarked positively about low and dimmed lighting. And again, for those of you I saw in the chat who are BCBAs, who are your school counselors and psychologists, you probably recommend this to people all the time with kiddos who have either overactive students or easily overstimulated students, that those fluorescent lightings can just be really triggering. And so whenever we can turn those off and light a lamp or open our windows instead, it tends to be something students like, at least from our results. Regarding desks, some students noted the importance of being near an exit or the ability to see the whole room. So it was very interesting how some students, when they're describing the environment in which they felt the most safe, it was really important to them to be in the back corner where they could see everybody, versus sitting in a front row where everyone was behind them. And it's those sorts of things that if we don't know it ahead of time, we could be accidentally triggering students repeatedly just based on a seating arrangement that could really easily be fixed. Others liked having various seating options or the ability to move from their desk, which that freedom I think was just really impactful, and also the ability to have choice and agency in where they sit. And then I saw this in that chat too, but the U shape is something that I saw both you guys and the students who took this survey referencing, that they really liked everyone being able to see each other. And so that sort of U-shaped setup was something that was highlighted a lot. And so it's interesting when we saw it from you guys too. In regard to how problems were addressed, students often said it was with private conversations. Things were quickly addressed and resolved. They weren't left to linger on or fester. The teacher was the mediator often, whether acting as the mediator between themselves and the student or another teacher, or between two students. The teacher was approachable and made students feel heard when there was a problem. And the students trusted that the teacher would address the issue, which I think is one of the things that always surprises people. You guys know this as trauma-informed educators. When I come into a school and I say, I'm here to help you create safe and supportive learning environments, they think that means that we're all going to sit around and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and let the kids do whatever they want. When in reality, knowing that there's an authority figure that you can trust to handle issues, to set clear boundaries and expectations and hold people accountable to them, is something that students remarked as allowing them to settle, to relax, and to feel safe in their environment. When we have that authority figure, we're able to then sit back and not feel like we have to take it on, which is often something we see with our students who've experienced trauma. If there's nobody in charge in the room, they're going to become in charge, right, to keep themselves safe. And so I just thought that that sort of repeated way that we saw students responding about problems being handled by the adult as being really important in keeping a safe environment just reiterated the importance of consistency and expectations as part of our safe and supportive classrooms. And then collaborative solution finding. The students didn't use, restorative practices language, but I do think that there was sort of, for those of you who are familiar with restorative practices and restorative conversations, it did seem like that sort of approach where we're inviting all parties in a private setting to say their piece and to give feedback was something that the students appreciated, that there wasn't just sort of like a top-down approach, but a collaborative response. And a quote from one of the students was that in the safest classrooms, problems and challenges are addressed through a collaborative and restorative approach that focuses on communication, empathy, repairing harm rather than on punishment. And again, we didn't even use the word punishment anywhere in our study. And so I just am so grateful when we see what we know are best practices reiterated by students, like out of the mouths of babes, even if they are high schoolers. And when we're focusing on repair over punishment, I think students are aware, they can feel that difference in us as the authority figure. And I do think, as we're digging into our coursework over this term, and discussing the differences between, our procedures and protocols in a safe and supportive way. How are we teaching instead of punishing when there is a lagging skill or a challenging behavior is always sort of an interesting question to chat about within your cohorts. Another student said that problems were addressed through open, non-punitive discussions and collaborative solutions. The classroom relied on clear, consistent, and fair boundaries, with mistakes treated as opportunities for growth. I mean, what a dream if we could all take this student's words that they just threw onto a survey that they didn't even really have to do, and for our classrooms to function this way, and for us to support our colleagues in the creation of these sorts of environments where we're really addressing problems in this open, non-punitive way, with the hope for repair. When students describe the educator who made them feel safe, they often describe things like they were available for non-school related conversations. The educators didn't make mistakes feel like failure. We know that students who've experienced trauma have many responses, one of which is perfectionism that we often forget about. It's really easy to focus on the table flippers and the fighters, and it sometimes we forget to also be paying attention and creating space for our perfectionists to make mistakes safely and to take risks and to not internalize those risks and mistakes as failure. And it seems like from our study, students felt that. And those who maybe do have some of those more perfectionistic tendencies or can be prone to shame, and which is a common response to trauma, is that shame response of not I did a bad thing, but I am bad. Having these mistakes not feel like the end, not feel like failure, was really important in feeling safe in a school environment. Again, we saw this repeated, that they had clear boundaries and expectations. Again, this was on a different survey than the other question because we divvied up the questions, the qualitative ones. And so repeated from different students in different schools and different environments, the importance of clear boundaries and expectations was repeated. We saw that these educators take an interest in students' lives, make students feel heard, invited their opinions, and sincerely wanted students to succeed. I think this one in particular is that felt sense of safety when they can just feel like this teacher wants me to succeed. They want me to be here and they want me to win, is such a motivating factor for these students. And, there's sometimes one teacher and 35 kids in a classroom, or maybe one teacher and you teach 150 students a day. It's true that there's 7 billion people on the planet and we're not going to like them all, and that's okay. And the key there being that the students can never know. And we need to make sure that even if we can't be every student's champion, we're responsible for ensuring that they have a champion, and connecting that student with somebody in the building who they can have this experienced, felt sense of safety with, from this champion who sincerely wants them to succeed and will do everything in their power to help them get there. And I was also struck that all different subjects and roles were noted. And I know this is not surprising, I, as an English teacher, always felt that English teachers sort of had it easy when building rapport, right? Because we were asking students to write narratives or about themselves or respond to topics, and we could really easily fit social emotional learning into our curriculum and into the standards. But in our study, every math teachers, science teachers, English teachers, gym teachers, custodians, lunch ladies, bus drivers, coaches, social workers, all were named. Everybody was named. And which was a learning moment for me, that it has less to do with the content, less to do with what the teacher is teaching, and more about all these other factors, which I think is really encouraging, that it's possible in every single school environment, everywhere that we go. We have the ability to create this felt sense of safety. It's not siloed to a specific department, which is really encouraging. One student said that a reassuring teacher who thinks it's okay to make mistakes and that we learn from it. And when in regard to this mistake making, we asked students specifically, what made you feel safe enough to take risks? And I was amazed how much there was in this question a juxtaposition between the students or the teachers who made them feel safe and the ones they didn't. Students called out like, well, I had a student or a teacher call me dumb to my face or say that my question was stupid. So not doing that is helpful, which just feels like the bare minimum, but it is an unfortunate experience that these students have had, and that many students have had. And so when they were describing the environments in which they felt safe enough to take risks, knowing that their teacher won't embarrass them or won't allow them to be embarrassed by their peers was a huge factor. Classes with high participation, where everybody's sort of putting their ideas out there, knowing that they might be a flop, non-judgmental teachers, clear expectations, teachers that normalize mistakes as part of learning. I've heard of a teacher who every time somebody raises their hand and gives the wrong answer, the whole class cheers just to celebrate that attempt, and to really celebrate the act of trying. And then one student talked about having a support system or people they trust in that classroom made them feel brave enough to take risks. So that is sort of where our data ends, right? So we sent the survey out, follow up with interviews, and really had the opportunity to elicit a lot of this qualitative data from these high school students in these multiple settings. And it was really fascinating. And we're so grateful for their feedback. And it's something that I could just spend all day talking with them about. But one of the biggest takeaways that we have that we want to share with you all is the importance of doing this, not to like listen to us talk about the study, because I don't know that any of this is, earth shattering to any of you, right? Most of these things, it's great to see affirmed, but they make sense. What we think might be really important or interesting is for you all to do this process of asking your students and sort of going through the process that we went through, because now we have really specific feedback and data on this particular set of students, but every environment will be different and every student group will have different answers. And that's why this data, our findings, we aren't putting them out there as being perfectly transferable or generalizable. We want them to be different in every context. And so our encouragement to you is to use our survey, which we're happy to send you the questions to. You could pick various questions. You could incorporate them, as a do now activity. You could send the whole survey out. You could use all 4 iterations. The importance here being that the perspectives will certainly differ in every single context. We want you to then consider sharing your findings with your students. So once you've collected this data, share it. Say, in general, it seems like you guys really like X, Y, and Z. How do you feel about implementing this new procedure or practice or protocol? That collaborative piece of working together. And then brainstorm how to implement them. What do you guys think about implementing the findings from this survey? You all took time to fill these out and to give feedback. What do you think about how we should implement? And then prioritize what small changes can have a big impact. So those of you digging into courses 1 and 2 tonight, you'll be working a lot this term over small change that has big impact. The same in our classrooms of, okay, we have all this feedback about how our students experience a felt sense of safety. What is one small manageable tweak that I or my team can make that will have a big impact on how my students experience this environment? And then structure this into your classroom design and your policies as you do this. And there are patterns in student responses. Maybe it will change the way that your classroom is designed or certain policies that you carry in your classroom. And finally, adjust. The trauma sensitive school process is cyclical, as those of you in course 3 are going into this evening, learning about how we create trauma sensitive schools and districts from this more global systems mind. You're going to look at this term all about how the process is cyclical and how it takes this iterative process of surveying and adjusting and implementing and adjusting and implementing and surveying again and looking at your feedback and celebrating your success. And so we would recommend that as sort of a final step of this ongoing spiral towards safety, knowing that we will never arrive. As educators who seek to be safe and supportive and trauma sensitive, there will never be a day where we're done. And I don't mean for that to be discouraging and that your work is never done. I simply mean that we are forever spiraling closer and closer to that sense of safety for all of our students and all of